In the next edition of It's About Money, I'll be talking with Connell, who is the author of Breaking Point, a book about the explosion of student debt in the United States. Stay tuned for that next show. Welcome to another edition of It's About Money. I'm Nannette and thank you for joining us. We have a great program today. My guest is Connell, who is the author of Breaking Point, a young author, but a wonderful book about exploring the subject of student debt. So what motivated you to write about the subject? I mean, it's been in the news, but it's really an in-depth look on the subject. What made you think do the writing on the topic?
Well, while I'm going into my senior year this fall, really this begins at the beginning of freshman year when I was offered by the president emeritus, who teaches a course on constitutional law that I had been taking that semester. He offered me to do an independent study whenever I would like with him. So as I was thinking about ideas for the senior thesis, we ended up coming to the summer between freshman and sophomore year of college. And when my mother, who is a principal actually here in Penfield, who has 2 master's degrees, makes a very comfortable living, when she saw the increase from freshman to sophomore year, she said, Kevin, I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford to send you to the U of R if prices continue to go up like this annually. And so I just thought to myself, if a woman with her qualification, her education, her salary is struggling to send one kid to college, what's a person with a blue-collar job with 4 kids doing? How can he possibly send his kids to college? And so really I started to dig, and when the numbers that I found were startling. I found that since records have been kept in 1978, the cost of college has gone up by over 1,100%.
My goodness.
That's, to kind of put that into perspective, that's 2 times faster than transportation and healthcare costs, 3 times faster than housing costs, and 4 times faster than the hourly wage and CPI. This has ultimately led to an average household student debt of $29,400, which has accrued to a $1.2 trillion national student loan debt. Now, to put that into perspective, the next closest debt burden that Americans hold is credit card debt at $800 billion. So we have $800 billion is number 2, and $1.2 trillion is number 1.
Big difference.
Right, and the trend line suggests that we're going to be hitting $2 trillion within the next decade. And to put that into perspective, GDP is about $16 trillion. So that's 1/8 of our GDP is student loan debt. Massive.
It is absolutely staggering if you put it in that perspective. People think about how horrible student credit card consumer debt is, but remarkably outstanding, actually. Now, you said that one of the interesting perspectives is you're a student, you're going to your senior year at the University of Rochester, and you've written a book about, you're right in the middle of it, right? But most articles are written by academics who have been in the field. What makes you different? How does your perspective how is it different than other academics writing?
Well, so to answer this, I'm going to start with by paraphrasing a guy named Ron Ehrenberg out of Cornell, where your nephew goes. And he called colleges organized anarchies. And so essentially what that means is that while institutions compete for revenue, within an institution you have fields, within fields, departments, within departments, faculty, each of them struggling for a piece of the revenue pie. And so the reason why I'm different is because I'm not an academic who's in turn a faculty member who's looking for money for research projects or grants or whatnot. And so to me that presents a fundamental conflict of interest with most people who are writing on this subject, because what rational actor is going to address the college affordability crisis with proposals that are going to reduce the debt burden? Because the more tuition is, the more money that they have at their disposal. Whereas myself as a student, not only am I struggling with the pressures of actually living with this, I can offer kind of an honest and bold and very deliberate kind of approach when we're talking about the college student loan debt.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right, because reducing the budget means it has to give somewhere.
Right.
Do you let the buildings fall apart and not repair them, or do you reduce the salaries or the research money available?
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right. So it's great perspective. Thank you. Why do you think, what are the reasons? And we talked about, demand for resources, but what would you say are the key reasons for the explosion in college costs?
So really what we're talking about is part 2 of my book. Part 1 deals with for-profit institutions of higher education. Those are the ones that you see advertised, your
Mm-hmm.
kind of University of Phoenix's, Kaplan's, those sorts of things. But that only makes up 12% of enrollment. So when we're really talking about kind of the typical explosion in college costs, we're really referring to nonprofit colleges, which spans everything from community colleges to Harvard.
Got it. Okay.
With that 88% of enrollment, there are really 2 factors. The first is a phenomenon called prestige maximization. And that is essentially a product of how colleges are ranked by, say, U.S. News and World Report. Mm-hmm. Colleges are actually structurally incentivized to increase spending based on the criteria of their ranking. So, for example, 10% of a college's ranked is based upon their financial resources, 15% on faculty resources, another 5% on alum contributions, which generally go towards building buildings. Mm-hmm. And so, just there, we have a very large chunk of a college's rank determined directly on how much it spends. So there's a structural incentive to increase spending. The second is kind of this developing amenities war. The way that I explain this is pretty much in the last few decades, accessibility to student loans based on the private market, based on kind of a surge with federal investments, accessibility to student loans has increased dramatically. Mm-hmm. And so that essentially gives students or the customers a blank check. And now colleges no longer having to compete on price, they start to compete on these amenities. So for example, you have these construction projects in the tens of millions of dollars that are quite frankly wasteful. So a good example is a smaller project at the U of R is Danforth Dining Hall. In 2008, it underwent an $8 million renovation project, and now we have everything from a hibachi grill to a bistro. Hmm. Larger examples are, say, a $70 million project at University of Pennsylvania, which to their athletic facility, now they have everything from a lazy river to a juice bar to a co-ed sauna to a rock climbing wall. It's ridiculous. Hmm. And so it's this country clubization of colleges combined with the structural incentive to increase costs that has led to this explosion in recent decades of college spending and therefore college debt.
That's interesting. Anecdotally, I remember going to college where the dormitories were they're livable, but they weren't the most, plush. I wouldn't call it plush, but then these days you go to college apartments, like, my goodness, these are luxurious, almost something that someone would live in after they've been working for a number of years mm-hmm. and can afford it. But that's an interesting find. I just never knew that. That's interesting. Bistros and all these different kinds of water. So basically, do you think that the same problem exists with that smaller 12% for profit? Is that the same issue, or that's a different?
It's a very different issue. I actually look at the college affordability crisis much like a cancer patient. So while the for-profits only house 12% of enrollment, they house 26% of student loans and 47% of student loan default.
Oh my goodness.
And so the way that I would characterize them is they're the tumor. And then the rest of the system needs, chemo or whatever, based on that anecdote. But yeah, it's for-profit colleges they're fundamentally flawed in that they use education as a means to generate revenue. Whereas in a traditional setting, hypothetically, colleges use revenue to create a higher quality of education. Mm-hmm. So it's flipped on its head. Think of for-profit colleges like you would Virgin, which owns everything from airlines to cell phones. Mm-hmm. Okay, it would be like, while a traditional college is owned and operated by an independent board of trustees, which makes no profit, these for-profit companies are actually owned by a larger holding company, like say a Virgin. So for example, the University of Phoenix, which has an enrollment of 118,000 students, is actually owned and operated by a larger company called the Apollo Group, a major company on the New York Stock Exchange. Mm-hmm. And so you kind of see how, why that conflict of interest might lead to poor student outcomes. And so what you see is a combined 42% of their revenue is spent on recruitment and profit, whereas only 17% industry-wide is spent on instruction.
Oh, goodness. So the quality of the education is not as good if it's only 17%.
Exactly. And the real problem, or the real thing that I struggle with, is that they target low-income families. And this has led to the industry actually being financed with $32 billion annually by federal subsidies. That's 86% of their industry. So we are subsidizing 86% of an industry that doesn't invest in their students and actually leads many students to financial destitution and no career path.
That's pretty unfortunate. So basically what we're saying is there's this for-profit company that is in the business of making money however that's made, but there is this allocated federal money that comes through. So at the expense of the student who's borrowing money to supplement that federal aid to generate income for the shareholders in the recruitment. That's a very sad reality.
Well, and what's even sadder are the withdrawal rates. So the median 4-month withdrawal rate is 84% at Bridgepoint Corporation, for example, which owns and operates Ashford University. You see ads every once in a while here, but they're generally a West Coast-based company. They operate 99% is online. And so the reason why it's online is because brick and mortar is more expensive. You can run a cheap online program. Now, because of these extreme withdrawal rates, the for-profit industry, their success hinges on what's called churn. So it's essentially you need a constant flow of applicants. And the way that they do that is they dump a ton of money into recruitment and into advertising. And so while there are over 35,000 recruiters in the industry today, there are only a few thousand, both student services, so meaning like instructors, and career services.
Oh my goodness.
And yeah, it's a problem.
Oh my goodness, that's pretty sad. So really, as long as they replenish, there'll always be someone paying tuition. So when they drop off, of course, they're not paying the tuition, but those students have already borrowed the money and now have to pay it back.
Right.
And do you know, is there any data with regards to the return on investment? Like, of course, you go to school so that you can make a better living over time. Is there data available on that? Is that one of the things that you may have looked at?
So are you examining the for-profits, or are you examining just
actually
total?
Both. Interesting. It would be interesting to know individually and totally.
Well, so there was a major report filed through Georgetown University just this past spring, and what they showed is that they actually highlight one of the major misconceptions of high school seniors entering college, and that's the misconception that just because you go to a college and you get a degree guarantees a job. What we found, or what they have found, is that the type of degree the type of degree sets up a wide variance in terms of how successful you will be, both in your earnings potential and in your employment. And so one of the poorest, or one of the examples of a poor investment would say be a degree in anthropology, which has over a 15% unemployment rate. That doesn't include underemployment.
I see.
So you could technically leave college and be making macchiatos at Starbucks and still be considered employed. But you could have gotten that job straight out of high school.
Without the investment of education.
Right.
Yes, I see.
Whereas there are there are other majors like finance, so like your nephew, where they only have a 3% unemployment rate and an underemployment rate that's minuscule.
Right.
So it's really the type of degree
that matters.
Yes,
okay.
I'll go a step further from their report, and I'll say that when people are, this is more of a word of advice, when you're applying to colleges, you should really think about what you want to do. And based upon what you want to do, you should analyze what the market demand is for that. And you can go right to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and look at market projections. So let's say you want to be a nurse, you want to be an RN. Well, there's a shortage of RNs, so you should go to a state school, get a degree, a 4-year degree for cheap, and you'll leave college and you'll get a job like that.
Sure. Right.
Whereas if you want to be an attorney like I do, 1 out of every 2 law students are still unemployed after 3 years of graduating law school.
Oh my goodness.
So that market is incredibly saturated, therefore making it very competitive. And so you might need to make an investment in a private university that might be looked to by the market as being more prestigious or qualified, or whatever word you want to insert. But really, you should do your research in terms of what do you think you might want to do, and then based upon how saturated that market is, then you should make a decision on, well, is it so competitive that I need to really make an investment in going to one of these elite private universities, or can I get the same type of education at a public institution for way cheaper and get the same job?
Got it. That's wonderful. Got so much to talk about. We're going to take a quick break. Kevin Connell, author of Breaking Point, will be right back.
It's true what they say about America. Here, we have the opportunity to be anything and do anything we set our minds to. At Federal Student Aid, we dedicate our minds to funding America's future, one student at a time. All for one very important reason. So a mind like this one will have a chance to go on and do great things.
And we're back. I'm Nannette, and it's about money. My guest is Kevin Connell. He's the author of Breaking Point. He's entering the University of Rochester as a senior, but he's written this in-depth book about examining the cost of attending college. So we were talking about really examining the value or the return of investment into education before embarking in it. Like you're talking about an RN being able to get a better return on investment regardless of the school they probably went to, but whereas an attorney would have to really look at what return they're getting if employment is only 1 out of 3 after 3 years. So given that the numbers are pretty are not straightforward. That it is a fallacy that getting a college degree means getting a job. And I guess it was like anything else, there's no guarantee. Would you say that there is economic value to attending college?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, no report says that you're worse off going to college than if you hadn't. If you look at the median earner of a high school dropout versus a high school graduate versus a 2-year associate's degree, bachelor's degree, there's an increase with the median.
Yes.
I guess what I'm saying is looking at the median may not be the best. You may want to be looking at the marginal.
Okay.
In terms of, the median might be here, but we also have a lot of people that are on the failing side of that median too.
Sure.
And so is there economic value? Yes, there can be. You just need to be smart about how you invest. So let's put it this way. I played trumpet with your nephew in high school, and I continued to play trumpet in college at the U of R. It's been one of the best experiences that I've had there. When I go to Washington, D.C., among the endless tourist attractions, one of my favorite places still is the National Art Gallery.
Mm-hmm.
I go to the RPO Holiday Pops concert every year. I value the arts. Mm-hmm. However, the arts are not necessarily valued by the job market. And so when there are a lot of people who say, oh, well, I'm really interested in, say, anthropology, or I'm really interested in dance. So maybe I'll go and I'll get a major in anthropology and a minor in dance. And that's great, but you also have to be realistic about what the job market demands. And that you have to be realistic that, yeah, there might be a 5% employment rate for these people, but there's a 95% chance that you're not going to be one of those people.
Mm-hmm. So really it's get the education that would have, if you're investing the money in education, look at really the economics of that and what kind of return investment. But it doesn't mean that you have to drop off your interest. Like in your case, it'd probably be more challenging to find a living being a trumpet player. Although you enjoy that and probably continue to play, you would support the arts or enjoy the arts occasionally or maybe frequently, but that's not going to be your means of living.
Right.
Or making a living, I mean, so.
Well, and what, the reason why I've been able to enjoy these things is that, the arts have and always will be a privilege. And the reason why I've been able to enjoy these is because my mother, makes a good salary, so she could pay for me to go to these things when I was young. Mm-hmm. And so really I feel like the best way to grow the arts is to grow the middle class. And the best way to grow the middle class is to make sure that people are leaving college with some sort of return on their investment, with a return on earnings potential, employment prospects. So when people get jobs that pay them good money, now they can go out and enjoy the arts, mm-hmm. rather than getting them a degree in the arts. And now they have to work 2 menial jobs just to scrape by with paying rent and utilities and paying off their student loans. Sure. And now they have neither the time nor the financial resources to go out and experience the arts. Got
it. So really, if you are in the median population, you might as well find another way to make a living. However, if you're on the other side of the margin where you might accelerate in something, you might be creative at making a lot of money. Because in any industry, there are people who make a lot of money, but we're really talking about the general median that statistically speaking, it's hard to make an excellent living and support the arts if that's your interest.
Right.
Yeah, that's great, because I always find that that education is the fastest way out of poverty. Mm-hmm. That if one is educated, didn't come from parents of education, that if you educate yourself and I suppose it's not just educating yourself, but really finding ways to excel at what you do, mm-hmm. And if you're going to do that, you might as well find the career that's going to give you return on investment rather than continuing to struggle. Right. So it's the part of the formula that a lot of people forget to think about. Mm-hmm. So, and then I also have this perspective that education has to be, it helps you learn how to learn. Like I went to Cornell for nutrition, but I'm a financial advisor. So I tell people the similarities, I used to count calories, now I count money. My return on my time is better counting money than it would be counting calories. Lots of great dietitians and could really excel in that, but for me it was a change in path. But I think it's the idea of learning how to learn and not staying in the median, right? Because I think if people just kind of stay the normal path, it may be hard to excel, but if you look at other ways to change your life around and use your education in a positive way, mm-hmm. it could be good. So what are some of the other struggles that, so we've got this excessive spending, and excessive spending is really driven by the ranking. And if you think about that, right, that's the reason for it. We want to rank high, so let's spend more. Mm-hmm. And if we think about it, how can we spend more? Do we pay more salaries, or do we just build structures that will cost us money that would give amenities to the students?
Right.
So, and one of the struggles I have with that is, we go back, at least my generation, we go back and say, remember when we were a student, we were struggling? Now, how can the students say that? They weren't really struggling as students. Besides paying the student loan, when they have all the amenities that right. country clubs have.
Right.
So your expectations are a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Essentially, I think that right now college is kind of creating this false sense of luxury. for college students. I also think, you know, I talked about predatory recruitment practices a little bit with the for-profits. I guess I'll go into that. In ITT, one of the things that I came across in an ITT Tech recruitment manual was literally a picture of a dentist pulling somebody's tooth out, saying, "Find the pain."
Oh.
The next page is, there's a traditional sales funnel, but they called it the pain funnel. And essentially, recruiters are instructed to ask a series of questions that once they get whoever the lead is, or the prospective student, they call them leads, once they get the lead on the phone, they're instructed to ask them a series of questions that maximize pain. So they essentially, they prey on these innocent people and kind of these very vulnerable people who don't have a lot of job security, not a lot of potential in terms of immediate future prospects. And they kind of put them into a corner and kind of atomize them, make them feel small. Although it's not to that degree, traditional colleges do the same thing in terms of kind of misleading students. A good example would be at the U of R. Yes, we have Danforth, but we also have Douglas Dining Hall, which hasn't been renovated in decades. It's your kind of what you would think of if you were to think of, you know, going back to your college days. It's your typical cafeteria food. There's nothing fancy about it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when students are taken on their, you know, tour in the spring for the U of R, where do you think they take them? They take them to Danforth, and they take them to Danforth because you walk in and it's the wow factor. So, you know, I would argue that there's kind of predatory recruitment in all sections, but really the most concentrated and the most lethal are at the for-profit sector.
I see. So it's really a sales process, right? We want to sell you our education system, and we're going to show you the best that we have so that you could imagine yourself and relieve the pain.
Right.
Imagine yourself in this institution. But in our discussion, I want to make sure that our audience doesn't think that we belittle the value of education, because it really is very important. It's just be careful of what you're getting yourself into. Just make sure that you're getting the return on your money, because it really, at the end, it's about money.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's...
Well, it's about sustainability. And so I recently did an interview with a smaller online source called the Daily Pulp, actually with a former graduate or student at the U of R, and he kind of took issue with some of the things that I was saying about how students should pick and choose some of my amenity or some of my solutions to the college crisis. Pretty much, what I think the proposals that I make is to make college responsive to what the job market demands. Ultimately, my solution has kind of it's two-pronged. You have, from it, you end up having college costs reduced because you're trimming back the fat in terms of spending. You're cutting programs that don't get people jobs. You're cutting the amenities projects. You're cutting all this. So you reduce the operating costs. On the flip side, you're also ensuring that people are being funneled into degrees that will get them jobs. And so, you know, really, when we're talking about the student loan crisis, what we're talking about is sustainability. It's creating a system that is sustainable. Do I wish that we could send every single person for a 4-year liberal arts degree? Absolutely. Do I wish that hard choices had to be made? Absolutely not. But do we have to before we reach our breaking point, our financial cliff? And the answer is yes. We need to create a sustainable system.
So be sure to catch his book, Breaking Point. Kevin Connell, University of Rochester student, and a lot of future success lined up for him, I can see. So until next time, I'm Nannette, and this is It's About Money.